Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today we are looking at the Oranguru Looker Lock deck, where we are going to be using the new Oranguru, which has the resource management attack, in order to create an infinite loop with Raichu, the ever-famous annoyance in the format that can auto-paralyze. So, I know a lot of you are expecting Gladion and Luxray. We're still slightly tweaking those decks, so give us time with those. We really want to make sure those are correct, because they are difficult lists to build. In the meantime, if you want to lose some friends whilst playing Pokemon, try out this new lock deck. Here we go. Starting off with the basic concept, we have essentially what we've seen recently is some relatively successful lock archetypes. Going back to the London International Championships, we saw Heatmore Raichu make a top 16 placement. There was also Stoutland, Raichu, and Expanded that was being piloted by Ross Cawthorne, one of the great lock players of the Pokemon TCG of all time. And we've also seen a Hydreigon variant of Raichu as well, where you use the Hydreigon to discard cards from your own bench, and then your entire game plan is cycling your discard pile to keep using Raichus every single turn. Really, really fun archetypes where it's all based around this Raichu, where you can get auto paralysis off every single turn. And this list is going to be no different. We're going to try and spam Raichu. Using Oranguru, we can reload our Devo sprays over and over again, and then use Looker to re-access them immediately in order to keep spamming the paralysis every single turn. And this means that we can mill the opponent. Essentially, we will never deck out because Oranguru can always get back 3 cards for us, and essentially, you never even need to mill the opponent physically in order to win the game. You just need to take the game to fatigue almost. But on certain turns, we can use things like Team Rocket's Handiwork in order to accelerate this process. And at the same time, we can randomly remove some important targets from the opponent's deck. Things like Guzmas, things like Puzzles of Time, Switch cards. These are all important to mill. So on turns where you don't require Looker, you can use Team Rocket's Handiwork to get some additional mill on the opponent, and that is how we're going to try and win the game. So, let's jump into the Pokemon here. Here is the Oranguru, 120 HP as a basic Pokemon, pretty decent bulk for the early turns when you haven't established your lock, so it's not even easy for people to cash in on the early turns against you, which is really pretty cool. His first attack is the one that we'll be using almost every single turn. Resource Management for a single colorless allows you to put 3 cards from your discard pile on the bottom of your deck in any order. And this says cards. That means it can be energy, items, supporters, Pokemon. It can be anything you want. You can get back every single card in your deck via Oranguru, 3 copies of, or 3 of them, and then put them to the bottom. Bottom of the deck obviously means you can't draw into these cards, but we have the new Looker supporter, which means we can access them on the following turn, which is pretty much what the entire loop is based around. He does have a second attack, which does 60 in Confusion. I don't think you'll ever need this, but it's an extra status condition for maybe things like Greninja, where they can go for Shadow Stitching to stop Evo Shock. You could even go for this attack to confuse them and buy yourself a turn here and there, so bear in mind you can do it, but you probably never will. It's all about the resource management, really. The following support is going to be Pikachu's. The 70 HP one is premium to get, of course, because Leafeon Decidueye is an archetype coming out in Ultra Prism, and it's very easy for them to get 3 Decidueyes built up, not quite as easy for them to get 4 built up. Obviously, Leafeon Decidueye is one of your hardest matchups, but if they can't develop 4 Decidueyes, it's actually still winnable for this list, so bear that in mind. Very important to have a 70 HP Pikachu in the list. This is one that also has Thunder Wave as well. We are playing exclusively Lightning Energy, so Thunder Wave is a viable attack, and again can be an early means of preventing aggression from the opponent before we've established the Raichus. There is the Raichu. It has that ability that is just so insane. We're going to try and spam this every single turn with Devo Spray, and that is essentially what the lock is based around. Xurkitree GX is a really nice one-of inclusion, thanks to its GX attack, Lighting GX, and it essentially allows us to look at the opponent's hand, add a card you find there to their prize cards. So it's an extra prize they have to take, and it's also a resource that they can essentially never get back into, because in theory, they're never going to be taking prizes against us once we have established our lock. It's a little awkward because Xurkitree has a 2 retreat cost, and we don't run a huge amount of energy in the deck, and of course we want to be using resource management whenever possible. But Xurkitree, you know, this GX attack is nice. It sets them back a turn or an attack at times, so he can really keep you in the game, and he has the ability Flashing Head, which also means that he can't be damaged by Pokemon with special energy attached to them, and that's a large portion of the format, so you can lone Xurkitree, win some games, and forego your entire strategy at times, so that's also hilarious. He's definitely worth playing as a one-of, just because his GX attack can be really nice. Rumble-wise can do 100 and discard the top card of your opponent's deck as well for some additional mill if you would really like to. We do play enough Lightning Energy to actually power this up. So if you want to get some more turbo discards, and if you feel like you're happy with your hand, you can go for this if you really want to, but again, I don't advise it too much. Maybe if it's a deck that plays just special energy, you can accelerate your win condition. Rather than going for mill, you could just start hitting 100 a turn and putting pressure on that way, but not a big deal. Next up, we have one Giratina promo. One of your worst matchups would be Greninja without this promo. Greninja, of course, does still have Shadow Stitching, which is awkward because you can't do Evo Shock. So we have to be aware of that. It is an awkward matchup, even with the Giratina promo, but I believe it's winnable with the techs that we do have in here, and this is, of course, one of them. The Giratina stopping the Greninja break from just sniping us and taking the wins. I think alongside this and Max Potions, we should probably beat Greninja, even though we can't use Evo Shock for some portion of the game. So yeah, pretty good card, pretty necessary just for the format. Additionally, the stand-in Zoroark can be a problem for the deck because, of course, they can get around paralysis with that ability. At least you can deny them going into their break evolution and start using resource management, stealing our own attack, because we will prevent them from standing in with the Devour Light ability as well with Giratina. So it's a twofold effect, affecting two decks which are pretty good at beating us because they have outs. Zoroark has stand-in, Greninja has Giant Water Shuriken. If they ever go break evolutions in either situation, it's not going to help them. In fact, against the Zoroark player, it will actually hinder them. So very good to bear in mind, definitely worth the slot. Finally, two Tapu Lele GX. It can be free prizes. They can get those Guzmas and KOs. We do play Ninja Boy in the deck, so we're going to try and, if ever we do play down Tapu Lele, we'll just be doing it for early Brigettes. And then we'll try and Ninja Boy it into a single prize Pokemon or a Xurkitree. So only two copies. You'll pretty much never play them both down unless you're very, very ahead in the game. So you have to be a little bit cautious, but it still opens up the door for early game consistency, which is pretty premium in pretty much every deck. So onto the items. There's going to be tools and stadiums on the next slide as well, because there's just so many in this list. There's going to be the one of Looker's Whistle. It's a new item card that allows you to search your deck for two Lookers, the new supporter, reveal them and put them into your hand, shuffle your deck afterwards. This is really nice. It's an extra like 5th copy of Looker, if you think of it that way, in terms of getting access to a supporter card in your early turns. And Looker is going to be very important. We're also playing Volkner in a high count in this list, because we are playing Lightning Energy, and you can see hella items on the screen right now. That's what we're going to try and access. So going for Volkner for Looker's Whistle can then get us into Lookers for the following turns. And Looker is what the entire deck's based around. So I believe the one copy is worthwhile, simply because you can cycle it with Oranguru anyway. It really helps end-proof us as well. Obviously, because we do get into this cycle whilst using Looker and Oranguru, it is going to be your opponent's intention to N away your hand and stop you from doing this cycle as effectively as we can do. So having the Looker's Whistle on top of Lookers that we can keep recycling with Oranguru means we're probably going to get back into our cycle fairly quickly. From there, we're going to play one copy of Crushing Hammer. I decided to throw this in just to have an out to the games, the small percentage of games where the opponent, for example, gets two stand-in Zoroarks on the board, where your paralysis lock is going to flunk. You can then go towards Crushing Hammer and try to cycle that one card over and over again to get rid of their Darkness energies and double colorless energies. I'm playing it over an Enhanced Hammer because they could be playing basic Darks. I think there's a potential chance that a straight Zoroark deck will be rising up in popularity post Ultra Prism, because the Break Evolution copying things like Dialga GX, Duskmane Necrozma is completely nuts. So that deck is probably going to be rising in stock. So having a Crushing Hammer in here to play around the double Zoroark seems good. And in general, it's an insta-play card that you can almost always play every game, and then it can sit in your discard pile for the rest of the game. It's never going to be a big hindrance for you. And there'll be random other awkward Pokemon that you can get around by playing the Crushing Hammer. So I think it's just one copy. It's definitely worth it. It can bail us out of weird situations against decks that you wouldn't expect. So I think it can be a nice card. From there, 2 copies of Field Blower. Parallel City can be an annoyance for this deck, as can, of course, Garbodor. Garbodor going to be the biggest issue. We are playing 4 Volkners as well as 2 Field Blowers, so we have fast outs to finding this card. And then, of course, we can recycle it immediately with Oranguru, which we almost always will, because it's a premium card in the matchup. So I think just 2 copies should be fine, seeing as though you can always expect in an important matchup to loop it whenever you need to. And 2 copies feels safe to me. 2 copies of Max Potion, pretty important for 2 matchups. First of all, the Greninja matchup I've already mentioned with the Giratina promo. So they're going to go for a Stitching Lock. We can still go for Resource Management, they Shadow Stitch. We can go Resource Management, they Shadow Stitch. Then we can Max Potion, attach Resource Management, get back our Max Potion and the Lightning Energy that just got discarded. And again, we have Volkner. We can find the combo of Lightning plus Max Potion very easily, even if we don't have the Looker. So both of these 2 supporters working in combination in the deck means that we can get around Greninja. They have to break the Shadow Stitching lock if they want to beat us, and that's pretty much a trap because they can't win if they don't go for Shadow Stitching. So yeah, Max Potion really good for the Greninja matchup, but additionally, it's going to be helpful against Decidueye, another big bad matchup for you. I said that Decidueye pretty much needs to get 4 big birds out against you to really start putting the pressure on. That is kind of true, but I mean, with 3 Decidueyes out, they're still going to be putting a lot of pressure on, as long as they're spreading their damage. But thanks to Pikachu having 70 HP rather than 60, we have potentially more turns of survival against them, which is pretty cool. And when you add in 2 Max Potions in the mix, if you're going to keep spamming those alongside your Devo Spray, you're going to have a chance against the Decidueye players. I think it'll still be a bad matchup, but you'll gain a lot of turns by spamming Max Potion over and over again on the damage that they are putting around your board. And without the Max Potions in the list, you will simply lose over like a course of 4 turns, I guess, because your Pikachus will get knocked out, then you can't do your Raichu lock, and then they can start attacking and just run through you. With the Max Potions in the list, we can mitigate their spread damage from the Decidueye. Of course, they're going to spread it around your board, but as long as you can keep one of your Pikachus always healthy for a devolution into a new Raichu, you should be relatively fine. You'll still have a chance to win the game, in my opinion. So, obviously a bad matchup. The Max Potions gives us a chance. I think it's worthwhile playing 2 copies. 2 copies of Countercatcher. We're not playing any Guzma in the list. So Countercatcher is our main means of gusting. Gusting is, of course, important for picking up things like stand-in Zoroarks, so then we can paralyze it. If they're only playing 1 copy, we can still get around that. Additionally, there's the new Lunala GX that could be a pain in a similar vein because it has the rush-in ability effectively. There's also things like against Greninja, even though we are playing the Giratina, you can strand a Starmie or a Tapu Fini or a Tapu Lele that they can play, and then the lock continues without there ever being a Shadow Stitching ever again, because they put a Pokemon down that isn't Greninja, that gets stuck, we can auto win, especially if they don't play Guzma, which most Greninja players don't. So Countercatcher, really, really good in here. It's not a Guzma because we want to be playing either Looker or Volkner or Handiwork each turn, so we're going to use items to gust instead of the supporters, and of course we're never taking prizes with the deck, so as long as we're behind, you have to be careful of one thing and one thing only, and that's your Xurkitree GX attack. If you have 6 prizes, they have 7, you can't use Countercatcher, but if they are taking the initiative against you, you know, they hit 1 Guzma here and there, or some of their Guzmas, and start taking single prizes across the board, that's reasonable. Then Countercatcher is going to be important for you to strand things and re-establish your lock, which is obviously a great thing to do. 2 copies of Nest Ball alongside a couple of Brigettes that we're playing is going to hopefully get multiple Pikachus on the board and backup Orangurus. as quickly as possible. This is really important for establishing your lock. And alongside that, we're going to play 4 copies of Ultra Ball. There are cards that we can discard. We can always reload with Oranguru, so it's happy days, never fear. You can even be discarding Devolution Sprays with your Ultra Ball. It's never going to be a problem as long as you can get into your Oranguru. So maxing out on Ultra Ball gets us into Lele as often as possible, which gets us into Brigette, which gets us into our early setup. And then the Ultra Balls from then on will be getting you Raichus and other things like that. Sometimes even Ultra Ball is worth recovering with resource management just to end-proof you later on in the game. Although we're never taking prizes, so we're always going to get end to a large hand size anyway, but it's just one of those things you can do to be as safe as possible. So 4 copies of Ultra Ball, obviously pretty nice overall, great card. 4 copies of Devolution Spray, it's what the entire lock is based around. I always use the most recent image of cards, so it looks a bit weird that this is an Evolutions card, but this is the most recent Devo Spray we have available. And seeing as though we are a lock deck, this can add some salt into the mix as well for the opponent, because they have to keep looking at essentially a base set card that's pretty much screwing them over, which is also great fun. So that's why we're using that exact copy, and I implore you to do the same when you play this IRL. Next up, the tools and stadiums, fairly simple stuff. 2 float stones, going to help us move between our dudes. We do have chunky Oranguru, Xurkitree, and just in the early turns, moving things like Pikachu to get into Oranguru, so we can start using resource management as quickly as possible is going to be great. And 2 copies of Sea of Nothingness as our stadium. Special conditions are not removed when Pokemon evolve or devolve, both yours and your opponent's. So this is really nice. Obviously, there's things like Stage 2 decks out there which can get around paralysis by simply evolving and then attacking you. Alongside things like Guzmaring, they can sometimes take the 6 prizes against you, or 7 prizes that we're going to try and force with Xurkitree. So Sea of Nothingness means that that's no longer an out. It's also important against Greninja. Once again, I'll keep mentioning it because it's one of our more awkward matchups, but we are fully teched for it. It means they can't simply evolve into their Greninja break if we ever do establish the Evo Shock lock on them. So Sea of Nothingness can be additional help. Obviously, they can hit like Field Blower plus Evolution, but it's more combinations that they have to have in their hand. And at the very least, this is alongside the 2 Field Blower, more counter stadiums for Parallel City. There was actually a consideration for myself to play my own Parallel City so that you can remove Lele's more efficiently, but I felt that we're already quite weak to Parallel, so I didn't want to have more cards that can't get us out of it, if that makes sense. So right now, playing 2 copies of Sea of Nothingness, I could see this potentially changing. Maybe you only need 1 copy, maybe a 3rd Field Blower is more safe against Garbodor, depending on how popular that will be in the new format. And potentially you could go for a 1-1 split with Parallel City. These are a few ideas I'm having right now. Sea of Nothingness is definitely one of the more flexy spots in our list for now to play around with. On to supporters, we are playing 1 copy of Gladion. Gladion going to be really nice for getting really important one-offs in the list. For example, the Giratina promo, the Xurkitree GX, the Ninja Boy can be important, but even some of the 2-ofs are important, like Field Blower, Max Potion, the one-off Crushing Hammer. There's all sorts of things. Even like getting a Devo Spray, even though we play 4 copies, it's going to be really important to just always have access to it. So Gladion, once you know what's in your deck and what's prized, you can take full effect of this and access your prizes, which otherwise, we can't do because we're never taking any in order to win the game. So Gladion's going to be a nice way of accessing our prize cards without taking the prizes themselves. 1 copy of Ninja Boy. As I said, Tapu Lele is a liability on our bench. It's going to be the thing that people always Guzma up just because it's going to be 2 prizes for them, and we can end up losing the game if they hit enough Guzmas. So Ninja Boying away your Lele into a single prize Pokemon at some point in the game is going to be really nice for you once you have established your lock, and it becomes a lot less of an issue. We are playing the 2 Tapu Lele. You can try and restrain yourself. I mean, we are playing 2 physical Brigettes, 4 Ultra Balls, and 2 Nest Balls, so it's not like you always just insta-go, I have Ultra Ball, let's go Lele Brigette. It's assessing how aggressive your opponent's deck is, how likely it is that 1 Pikachu will stick in your board compared to, like, do I need to get all 3 out early on? So you can have the debate. Ninja Boy is in here as a bit of flexibility for you more than anything else, and it's an additional switch card to the 2 float stones, technically, because it can get you into an Oranguru all over again. So again, I think it's worth a single slot, but no more than that. 2 copies of Brigette. It's always going to be nice to have a physical copy of this card, just to get that early game. Second Oranguru down, 2 Pikachus, that seems great. But beyond that, it's just going to be thrown into the bin with Ultra Balls, essentially. 2 copies of Team Rocket's Handiwork. As I said earlier on in the video, we don't ever need to play this card to win the game, really, because you can infinitely loop your own deck with Oranguru. But what this will do is sometimes hit key cards that can prevent your opponent from winning. That's all we're trying to do with the deck, prevent our opponent from winning, and sometimes it does require us flipping some coins, hitting some heads, and discarding some important cards, like Guzmas, like Puzzles of Time, like Pal Pads. These sorts of things would be high priority targets to mill. Even things like Super Odds and such are going to be really nice, so getting these into the discard pile will eventually win you the game at times. So often we're going to be in a loop of Looker, but there will be turns where you don't need to Looker, and that's when you can use the Handiwork and get some random discard and swing some matchups which may be out of your favor at the time. 3 copies of N. We will sometimes be going down in prizes. We can add some disruption into the mix. Typically, because we Looker so often, we're going to have a large hand size. So you don't want to N too much, but it's still a good early game card for you. And, you know, we're never taking prizes, so he's always drawing us 6. And the opponent is going to be to a low hand size later on in the game. So trying to disrupt them and keeping the lockup is going to be premium. And from there, we're going to play 4 copies of both new supporters, the Looker on the left and the Volkner on the right. Both serve really important roles here. Looker allows you to draw 3 cards from the bottom of your deck, which I've kept mentioning. This is what we loop with Oranguru each turn, or most turns, in order to recycle Devolution Sprays, physical Raichu copies, some of your Pikachus if they've been knocked out or anything like that, and just in general extra pieces along the way. You can even resource management back previous Lookers, Looker into Looker, for example, or Looker into Looker's Whistle to keep getting more of them. So things like this are going to be reloaded, and it's all thanks to this card that the deck functions. And then 4 copies of Volkner. I'm preferring this to Skylar because, of course, we are able to play Lightning Energy because Oranguru has a colorless attack cost, and it also complements both Pikachu and Xurkitree. It's really nice to play Lightnings in here. And this means that we can trim down on our physical lightning counts because Volkner can access them pretty freely, whilst also being essentially a Skylar. Obviously, we can't get stadiums or other supporters, but what you can get is pretty much everything else. So in the early turns, you can get your Nest Balls for Pikachus or Orangurus. You can get yourself Devo Sprays throughout the game if you've been end away and you've not found, or like, Looker's not nice when you've been end away because you can't immediately access your bottom deck, or you don't know what's on your bottom deck. Whereas Volkner can still fish out the Devo Spray that you need to continue your turn, essentially, and you're going to be in good stead. Or it can fish out an Ultra Ball to find a physical Raichu, for example. So this is always going to be a nice get-out-of-jail-free card when your opponent does play N against you, and you can keep your lock established whilst also fishing out Lightning Energy, which is further deck thinning, giving you more attachments for Oranguru, letting you set up Xurkitree, so all around good stuff there. And finally, the energy, just 6 lightning. That's all we need. I don't think we ever need more. You can always reload with Oranguru, so you'll never get milled out of energy. And we have Volkner, 4 copies, so we essentially have 10 outs to early energy, and that sounds like plenty, especially because we really don't need many in the deck. Again, there could be a flexi spot here. I wouldn't be uncomfortable going down to 5. Going down to 4 would be a little uncomfortable, just because it puts more strain on Gladion at times, and it puts more strain on Volkner, and oftentimes in early turns you would prefer to use things like Brigette rather than Volkner, but you can still fish out those lightning energies. So I think potentially 5 could be the right count if you really need to squeeze something in. But right now I'm not fearing too much of the deck. It feels fairly safe to me. So I think just overall being more safe is a better policy rather than trying to risk things and squeeze in like a second Crushing Hammer, which isn't too important, I don't think. So right now, settled on 6. It feels like we have plenty of outs to get lightning energy to attack with Oranguru throughout the game and not have to worry about recycling these too much. Because there are definitely more high priority cards that we can put back into our deck because these are otherwise very dead cards. So here is the full list. As you can see, I think overall we do have outs to some of our weaker matchups. As I've said, the Giratina plus the Max Potions, really good against Greninja for helping what is otherwise a very bad matchup. Max Potion as well gives us an out, or some time at least, against the Decidueye variants. I think the Leafeon build will be very difficult, but it may be easier against things like Zoroark, especially if they can't manage their own bench very well, and they can only establish like 2 Decidueye. I think you should quite easily be able to beat 2 Decidueyes being set up, for example, so that could be really nice. Bear in mind, of course, they can get 4 Decidueyes up, but sometimes prizes are bad, and this deck is great at negating prizes, so we can always use Xurkitree as well, which can deny a potential Decidueye coming out, so there's definitely ways that we can deny as many birds as possible, and with Max Potions in combination, I think we could be fairly safe against that matchup. I would think we would be unfavored, but the Max Potions gives us an out, and I like that. It feels counterintuitive against matchups where you're going to be able to go Infinite Lock. You just discard them with Ultra Ball. And that's what's really nice about playing 4 copies of Ultra Ball. You can discard your excess Brigettes, Ninja Boy if you don't need it, your extra Leles. You can discard these Max Potions or Crushing Hammer, whatever's not useful. And then your deck quality becomes insanely good. And your Oranguru is only going to recover like exactly Devo Sprays, Lookers, Volkners, and Ultra Balls, essentially, and like Raichus. Those are the only things you want to reload, essentially, once you've got into this loop. So there are some cards that look a bit janky and they're kind of dead, but 4 Ultra Ball are cards that we can recycle, which can then get rid of more jank in our deck throughout the game. So even though we're not playing discard supporters like Sycamore, reloading an Ultra Ball could really improve our overall deck quality. So when we are getting end, we'll always draw back into Devo Sprays, Raichus, Volkners, Lookers, and that's all we want, really. So definitely a powerful lock deck. I think the list is pretty good and has given us outs to a lot of the more popular decks that we have to be concerned about in the metagame. Let's look at some tech cards that we could be playing. Lots of different supporters have been played in the Hydreigon and the Stoutland and the Heatmore lists. The main reason why I'm not playing these sorts of cards, Lusamine is obviously a great card in mill decks. It gives you a lot of fuel. It can really help out your next few resource managements for like the following turns, because if you Lusamine back 2 Lookers, that means your next 2 resource managements don't have to be for Looker, which then it means that they can be cards like Ultra Ball, Volkner, and Devo Spray most importantly. So that could help out some turns, but as well as things like Acerola for extra healing and retreating, like pseudo retreating, I guess you could say. Delinquent can discard more random cards here and there, and also can contest the Stadium War. Guzma as well for helping stall. These are all great cards, obviously. Great in mill decks in general. We've seen these in Wishy-Washy Walls and in Sylveon, and may even be played in Quad Glaceon. But they're not perfect for this deck because we need to Looker so often. That simple. That's why I'm not playing these cards. You could consider playing like 1 or 2 ofs, potentially. I wouldn't like hate those ideas. But for now, I feel like Looker is what we want to be doing as often as possible. Sometimes Volkner, sometimes Handiwork. That feels like once we're in the loop, those are the only cards we want to play. And these ones sort of fall by the wayside. Puzzles of Time, they've been used in the other sort of shock lock lists, and they can be extra outs into Devo Sprays and such. It also means that your top deck can change what you would have gotten sometimes from your discard pile with resource management. For example, if you were to top deck into a Devo Spray, then you may not need to use Looker to or use Looker that turn to get the Devo Spray that you just put back to the bottom of your deck. So sometimes you can get puzzles instead, so you can use that Looker, and puzzles can be for more important cards that turn based on what your opponent did. So it means that you're making the decisions, you're making a more informed decision essentially of what you're recovering with your Oranguru. The reason why I'm not playing these cards is I like the spaces. I like having 2 ofs of a lot of my tools and item cards, even though we play Gladion, because I feel if you have prized like multiple 1-ofs that you need to access, you're going to be in trouble. So I think trimming down items to make room for the puzzles doesn't make sense unless you increase your Gladion count, and that just sounds horrible because Gladion's not fantastic and it's not a Looker, essentially. So I think puzzle would increase your reliance on Gladion, and that's a sort of scary prospect. So that's why I've not gone for it. But I have mentioned some flexi spots. Potentially 1 or 2 energies are flexible. Sea of Nothingness, potentially a flexible card. The Crushing Hammer potentially flexible as well. I've got it in here as sort of like a get out of jail free card against Zoroark variants if they are playing heavy stand-in, but the format's still fairly unknown. We don't know if like a quad Zoroark is going to become an archetype or not. So Puzzles of Time could be a better inclusion. I don't think you ever need to play 4 copies. Similar to Sableye, you could just play 3 copies and be quite happy. And yeah, potentially they could be added into the list, and then it means that your resource management is an easy decision. And then once you've drawn for turn and seen what your opponent's done, then you can make the decision on what you actually want to get back from the discard pile via Puzzle of Time. So it's a different direction you can go for and gives you a more informed decision, which is pretty cool. Alolan Sandslash is something that I know has been sort of tinkered with in Heatmore Raichu as a 1-1 line. And again, it could be tinkered with in this list. Giving us additional draws throughout the game is going to be nice. It just gives us access to more of our hand, which then we can be Ultra Balling away more excess junk that we don't need. And again, improving our deck quality. And that's really important for this list because you want to be locking the opponent every single turn. So having a Alolan Sandslash, using that Slush Rush each turn gives you an extra top deck essentially to give you more options and everything that you want. So could be nice. I think right now spaces aren't that important just to play a 1-1 line. Again, it means that you're using Gladion for this card rather than one of the other cards that's prized. It can be a little bit awkward, so that's why I've not gone for that option right now. I already mentioned a few other tech options during the video, things like Parallel City, definitely something I would consider, and there's a few other cards out there as well that may be worthwhile to try and lock people out. Even something like 1-1 Alolan Muck line could be interesting if the Lunala GX starts to see play. Or sorry, not the Lunala GX, what's it called? The Dawnwings Necrozma? Yeah, that guy. I may have called it Lunala earlier, that's my bad. But we all know what I was talking about. Yeah, so like an Alolan Muck could be thrown in the mix just to keep your Raichu working, but to shut down their I was going to say Duskmane. Their Dawnwings. Yeah, that could be important. So potential more tech options there as well. So cards that break the lock. I've already mentioned Shadow Stitching stops your Evo Shock. But I think with Max Potion's Giratina, we still have that on lockdown. Stand-in, of course, we can counter Catcher if they only play one Zoroark. Baby Zoroark at least, and they have, all the others are just Zoroark GXs. Then we can trap this guy quite often with Counter Catcher and then reload our Counter Catcher for the turns where they use Guzma. It's still going to be awkward even if they play one copy, but if they play 2, it's definitely very difficult for you, and that's why we have the Crushing Hammer to try and just get rid of all their energy in that case. Decidueye, obviously going to be difficult. We still are playing the Max Potions that we're going to try and use to make the game go as long as possible, but still feels fairly unfavorable. Solgaleo GX, currently only really like a 1-0-1 line in Metagross, and even that's like experimental really. As soon as the new Solgaleo comes out, the promo one that has the DC attack that recovers energy, I think Oranguru Shock Clock like instantly dies a death because that looks like, although it is a stage 2 variant that's like ability focused and whatnot, it looks powerful enough to be very, very strong. And dealing with Ultra Road is like pretty much impossible. So for now, I think it's reasonable just because there won't be too much Solgaleo Metagross, especially because Solgaleo GX is pretty much played just to get one-hit KOs, and now people can just play Duskmane Necrozma instead as a basic option that can hit 220, which is very similar damage to Sunsteel Strike. So you don't have the utility of Ultra Road, of course, from the Duskmane, but essentially you have the new Beat Stick in a single copy rather than a 101 line, which is a bit ugly. So I think Solgaleo, until the new promo comes out, I think we could be safe, but that could be something that we have to be concerned with for the future. And then a few more concerns out there. There's just people switching their Floatstone counts into physical switches, escape ropes, warp energies, and the new escape board that's coming out as well. Skateboard reads that if it minuses 1 retreat cost from your active Pokemon, and you can just still retreat through sleep and paralysis. That's obviously hideous for the deck. We are all about paralyzing and trapping, so we really can't get around a skateboard other than just field blurring them. So those are things to be concerned about. Additionally, one of the more crucial ones, I think, in my opinion, is just the inclusion of Palpad in some decks. Palpadding back 2 Guzmas essentially nets them 2 more prizes against you. Now, we do have the 1 Crushing Hammer. Potentially, we need to go heavier down the hammer route and have basically outs to whenever they do have Guzma, make it way harder for them to attack us in the first place. because Power Pad reloading a bunch of Guzmas going to be really bad for you. It really means that we need to be handiworking way more often and start hitting more of these Guzmas all over again. So it's a big issue for us. I think Power Pad, that could really swing games. Sometimes it will be touch and go whether or not this deck can take the win. Sometimes your opponent will be trapped at one prize remaining but be out of resources. Power Pad could switch that up and means that they still have Guzmas left to take their final 1 or 2 prizes. So that's something that we definitely need to keep an eye on. And I think that's why this deck ultimately still won't be a top tier archetype, even though it is an improvement on the sort of shock lock builds out there. I think there are natural cards coming into the format, and there's already Zoroark and Decidueye looking powerful. There's Power Pad being inserted into some decks. So the gusting effects will be higher, and essentially that just means that they can break the lock more often, and maybe, just maybe enough to win the game. And that's a good thing, because having a deck like this be like absolutely top tier will just be boring, and essentially means that we have to play ugly cards like a skateboard in our list just to play around this boring deck. So here are my closing thoughts. This does look like a more consistent version of the Heatmore variant. I've not tried too much of the Hydreigon build. I've seen that in progress, and I've seen that be very consistent when it is set up. Like, essentially, when the Hydreigon build is set up, it's a really good infinite loop, way more powerful than Heatmore, but it has worse teething issues in the early game, whereas Heatmore simply is a worse attacker than Oranguru, in my opinion, because you have to flip coins, you need an extra bench space for Victini, it's a DCE cost, so many things, so many problems come from playing Heatmore instead of Oranguru, so I think it's pretty much a strict upgrade, and is probably the best way that we can be playing Raichu these days. Raichu continues to be an annoyance, his ability is very, very strong, but I think the saving grace, as I just mentioned, there's enough commonplace cards in the metagame that can get around this deck that should be able to still have a win condition against this variant, even when you are in full swing with the lock. So potentially a tech here or there, an extra Power Pad, that could even be like the softest answer to beating this deck. If you're not playing Power Pad, just put a Power Pad in, and now you have 2 more Guzmas. That's 2 more prizes you can take against this deck, and it might be enough for you to win the game. So just switching one Floatstone for a physical switch and just changing a supporter for a Power Pad can completely change your matchup against this deck. And I think ultimately that's why this deck will fall at being a very top tier archetype. But I think in some early tournaments, this can definitely be a potent archetype, and one that people may not be prepared for, and one that could be very, very powerful. So that's going to be it, guys. What do you think about Oranguru Shocklock? Are there any other big cards that this deck straight out loses to? Are there any other things that you expected to be in the deck which aren't? Let me know down below. Were you thinking about this deck at all? Was it on your radar? Is it now something that you think could be pretty cool to test out and could be a potent archetype? Are you going to start teching against this deck? I'd love to hear it all down below. We're going to be back with more Ultra Prism tomorrow, and we have big videos coming out as well. Going to be the best decks post Ultra Prism, which will be a very interesting watch. And also we're going to do a top 10 decks for the expanded format as well, an updated list in time for the American regionals upcoming in Dallas. So plenty of things to get your teeth stuck into in the channel, so please check back soon. Please leave a like to this video if you did, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For now though, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.